The boy on the train. Imagine a young woman sitting on a crowded, delayed train traveling from Manchester to London. Her name is Joanne. The year is 1990. At this moment, she is not famous. She is not rich. In fact, her life feels like a series of small, quiet disappointments. She is working a job she doesn't love. Her heart is heavy with the recent loss of her mother, and she is staring out of the window at the passing English countryside. The train has stopped in the middle of a field. The passengers are sighing with frustration, but Joanne is no longer looking at the grass or the sky. She is looking inside her own mind. Suddenly, a vision appears to her. It is as clear as a movie playing on a screen. She sees a scrawny boy with round glasses and a lightning bolt scar on his forehead. He doesn't know it yet, but he is a wizard. She sees a giant man on a flying motorcycle. She sees a hidden platform at a train station and a school of magic hidden in the mountains. She doesn't have a pen that works. She is too shy to ask anyone on the train for one. So, for 4 hours, she sits in silence, letting the details of this magical world grow inside her. She imagines the owls, the wands, and the ghosts. By the time the train finally pulls into London, a universe has been born. But having an idea is not the same as having a success. Joanne's life was about to enter a period of darkness that would test every ounce of her strength. She began writing the story on scraps of paper, in notebooks, and on the back of old envelopes. She wrote because she had to. She wrote because the world she was creating was the only place where she felt truly alive. At home, things were difficult. Her mother had passed away from a long illness, and Joanne never got the chance to tell her about the boy wizard. This regret stayed with her, and it flowed into her writing. If you read her books today, you can feel the sadness of a child who misses his parents. That sadness came from Joanne's own heart. Seeking a fresh start, she moved to Portugal to teach English. She hoped the change of scenery would help her finish her book. She met a man, got married, and had a beautiful daughter named Jessica. For a moment, it looked like she was building a normal, happy life. But the marriage was troubled and soon fell apart. Less than 2 years after moving away, Joanne found herself on another journey. This time, she was flying back to the United Kingdom with nothing but a suitcase full of clothes, a few old notebooks, and a tiny baby in her arms. She landed in Edinburgh, Scotland, in the middle of a freezing winter. She had no job. She had no money. She was a single mother in a strange city with no one to turn to but her sister. She walked through the gray streets, pushing a stroller, wondering how she would buy milk or keep the apartment warm. She felt like a total failure. In her own mind, she was the biggest loser she knew. She was 30 years old, her marriage had ended, she was unemployed, and she was living in a tiny, cramped apartment on government assistance. This is the point where most people stop dreaming. When you are cold and hungry, it is hard to think about magic. When you are worried about paying the rent, it is hard to think about flying broomsticks. But Joanne did something different. She realized that she was at rock bottom. And rock bottom, she later said, became the solid foundation upon which she rebuilt her life. She had nothing left to lose, so she decided to do the only thing that mattered to her. She decided to finish the book. Every morning, Joanne would put her daughter in the stroller and walk until the baby fell asleep. Once the baby was dreaming, Joanne would rush into a local cafe. She would buy 1 cup of coffee, the only thing she could afford, and sit at a small wooden table. She would stay there for hours, her hand moving across the paper, writing the words that would eventually change the world. She wasn't writing for money. She wasn't writing for fame. She was writing for her life. The cafe was warm, the coffee was hot, and for those few hours, she wasn't a failure. She was the creator of a world where anything was possible. But the black dog of depression was always following her. The darkness wasn't just in the weather, it was in her mind. She felt a deep, cold emptiness that she couldn't shake. She described this feeling as being hollowed out. She eventually took this terrible experience and turned it into a creature in her book, The Dementors. These were monsters that sucked the soul and the joy out of people. This is the mark of a true hero. She didn't just suffer. She took her pain and turned it into art. As the months passed, the pile of handwritten pages grew. She was tired, she was lonely, and the world was telling her that she was nobody. But inside that cafe, under the yellow lights, a boy named Harry Potter was starting to win his battles. Joanne knew that if Harry could face his monsters, she could face hers. She finished the first book on an old manual typewriter, typing every single word herself because she couldn't afford to pay a typist or buy a computer. When she finally held the completed manuscript in her hands, she didn't have a publisher. She didn't have an agent. She just had a dream and a very long road ahead of her. The 12 closed doors. Joanne stood in front of a heavy post office box, holding a large, thick envelope. Inside was the completed manuscript of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. She didn't have money for a fancy folder or a professional delivery service. She had spent her last few pounds on the paper and the postage. As she watched the envelope slide into the box, her heart pounded. She wasn't just sending out a story, she was sending out her soul. She was sending out the only hope she had left. She walked back to her cold apartment, looking at her daughter, and whispered, "Please, let someone see the magic." The waiting began. If writing the book was a battle of imagination, finding a publisher was a battle of character. Joanne reached out to a literary agent named Christopher Little. He was the first person to see the potential in the story, but even with an agent, the road was blocked by walls of no. Christopher sent the manuscript to 12 different publishing houses. One by one, the letters started coming back. "The story is too long for children," one said. "A story about a boarding school is old-fashioned," said another. "We don't think children will be interested in magic right now," wrote a third. Imagine receiving 12 rejections in a row. Every time the mail arrived, Joanne's heart would jump, only to be crushed again. She was still living in poverty. She was still struggling to buy basic things. It would have been so easy to look at those 12 letters and say, "The world is right. I am a failure. I should stop this childish dream and find a real job." But Joanne had something that many people lack. She had an absolute belief in her vision. She knew Harry, Ron, and Hermione as if they were her own family. She couldn't abandon them because they had been her only friends during her darkest nights. The rejections weren't just business letters to her. They felt like personal attacks. Every no felt like the world was telling her that her mother's death, her failed marriage, and her hours in the cafe meant nothing. But she kept her head up. She told her agent to keep trying. She didn't change the story to make it shorter or simpler, just to please the publishers. She stayed true to her voice. She knew that if just one person saw the spark, the whole world would eventually catch fire. Then, after a year of silence and rejection, a small miracle happened. A small publishing house in London called Bloomsbury received the manuscript. The head of the company, Nigel Newton, didn't read it himself. Instead, he took the first chapter home and gave it to his 8-year-old daughter, Alice. An hour later, Alice came running out of her room. Her eyes were wide with excitement. She grabbed her father's arm and shouted, "Dad, this is so much better than anything else. You have to see what happens next." Because an 8-year-old girl fell in love with the story, the world was changed. Bloomsbury offered Joanne a very small amount of money, about £1,500. It wasn't a fortune, but to Joanne, it felt like winning the lottery. It meant she could buy shoes for her daughter. It meant she could pay the heating bill. It meant she was officially an author. However, the editor at Bloomsbury gave her a piece of advice that would make most people quit. He said, "You should probably get a day job, Joanne. You'll never make any money writing children's books." Joanne smiled and nodded, but inside, she knew he was wrong. She wasn't looking for a job. She was building a legacy. Even with a publisher, the struggle wasn't over. The first print run of the book was only 500 copies. They didn't have a budget for advertising. There were no posters in the subways or commercials on TV. The book had to survive on its own merit. It had to move from one child to another, like a secret whispered in a playground. She walked into a local bookstore and saw her book on a high shelf. She felt a surge of pride that no amount of money could buy. She had done it. She had turned the vision from the train into a physical object that people could hold. She had proven to herself that her rock bottom was not her grave, but her garden. The seeds she had planted in the cold Edinburgh cafe were finally starting to break through the soil. She didn't know that within a few years, those 500 copies would become 500 million. The spark and the storm. It started as a whisper. A child would finish the book and immediately give it to their best friend. That friend would read it under the covers with a flashlight and then tell their cousin. Suddenly, librarians were noticing that the book was never on the shelf. It was always checked out. Joanne began to receive letters. They weren't from publishers this time. They were from children. They wrote to her as if Harry was real. They asked her what flavor Bertie Bott's every flavor beans actually were, and they told her they were waiting for their own owl to arrive. Then came the first big award. The book won the Nestle Smarties Book Prize. For the first time, Joanne had to stand on a stage. She was a shy person who had spent years hiding in the corners of cafes, and now the lights were shining on her. But the biggest change was yet to come. Across the ocean, in the United States, publishers were starting to hear the noise coming from the United Kingdom. An American publisher named Arthur Levine from Scholastic Books sat down to read the manuscript. He didn't just like it. He was enchanted by it. He knew he had to have it. An auction was held for the American rights to the book. Usually, a new author might get a few $1,000s. But as the bidding went higher and higher, the world watched in shock. The final price was $105,000. When Joanne's agent called to tell her the news, she nearly collapsed. To a woman who had been living on government support, $105,000 felt like all the money in the world. She didn't buy a Ferrari or a diamond ring. The very first thing she did was buy a proper house for herself and her daughter. She finally moved out of the cramped, cold apartment. She walked into her new home and realized she could turn the heat on whenever she wanted. She could buy as many books as she wanted. She could look at her daughter and know, for the first time in years, that they were safe. But with the money came the storm. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who this mystery woman was. Reporters began to camp outside her door. They wanted to know about her failed marriage, her poverty, and her private life. Joanne, who had always used writing as a way to escape the world, now found that the world was trying to break into her life. She felt a new kind of pressure. She wasn't just writing for herself anymore. Millions of people were waiting for the next chapter. She began writing the second book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. The joy of writing was still there, but now it was mixed with fear. What if the first one was just luck? She wondered. What if I can't do it again? She sat in her new house, but she found herself missing the noise of the cafe. She missed being invisible. She had gone from being a failure to a phenomenon in less than a year, and her mind was struggling to catch up with her reality. Success is a strange thing. It solves the problems of hunger and rent, but it creates the problem of expectation. Joanne had to learn how to be a mother, an author, and a celebrity all at the same time. She decided to keep her life as simple as possible. She kept writing by hand. She kept her old friends. She realized that while her bank account had changed, her soul was still the same woman who had sat on that delayed train in 1990. By the time the third book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, was released, the world had officially gone Potter mad. People were lining up outside bookstores at midnight. The books were being translated into dozens of languages. From Brazil to Japan, children were wearing round glasses and drawing lightning bolts on their foreheads. Joanne was no longer just an author. She was the creator of a global culture. The weight of the crown. As the year 2000 approached, the world of Harry Potter was no longer just a series of books. It was becoming an empire. Movie studios in Hollywood were fighting over the rights to turn the story into a film. Joanne was offered millions of dollars, but she was terrified. She didn't want her characters to be turned into Hollywood cartoons. She wanted the movies to stay true to the heart of the story she had written in those cold cafes. She fought for every detail. She insisted that the actors must be British. She insisted that the story must stay in Scotland and England. She was a woman who had once been powerless, But now she was one of the most powerful people in the entertainment industry. She stood her ground against the biggest directors in the world because she wasn't protecting a brand. She was protecting her children. When the first movie was released, it was a massive success. Now, Joanne's face was everywhere. She was richer than the Queen of England. But this wealth brought a strange kind of loneliness. She couldn't walk down the street without being recognized. She couldn't take her daughter to the park without photographers following them. The Harry Potter world was so big that it started to swallow her real life. She spent long hours in her study, working on the later, darker books. The stories were growing up with her readers. She was tackling themes of death, bravery, and sacrifice. Some people criticized her, saying the books were becoming too scary for children. But Joanne remembered being a child. She remembered that children know the world can be scary. She wanted to give them a hero who could face that darkness and win. One night, while she was writing the fifth book, she found herself crying at her desk. She had to write the death of a major character. She felt the pain as if she were losing a real friend. This was the secret of her success. She wasn't manufacturing a story for money. She was living the story. Every tear Harry shed, Joanne had shed first. Every time Ron made a joke, Joanne had laughed first. She was the first citizen of Hogwarts, and she took her responsibility to her readers very seriously. Despite the fame and the money, Joanne never forgot where she came from. She used her wealth to set up charities for single parents and for research into multiple sclerosis, the disease that had taken her mother. She realized that the magic wasn't just in the books. The magic was the power she now had to change the real world for the better. She was no longer the woman who couldn't pay for heat. She was the woman who was building hospitals and supporting thousands of families. But the finish line was coming. The world was waiting for the final book. The pressure was unlike anything any author had ever felt in history. Millions of people were asking the same question: will Harry live or die? Joanne knew the answer, but she had to keep it a secret for years. She carried the weight of the world's curiosity on her shoulders, sitting quietly in her room, finishing the final chapters of a journey that had begun on a train 17 years earlier. The final page and the eternal flame. The year was 2007. 17 years had passed since that fateful, delayed train ride to London. Joanne sat in a quiet room in the Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh. The air was still. On the desk in front of her lay the final pages of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. She reached the end of the last chapter, dipped her pen one last time, and wrote the final 3 words of the saga. All was well. As she put the pen down, she didn't cheer. She didn't open a bottle of champagne. Instead, she covered her face with her hands and sobbed. She wept for the boy with the glasses who had been her constant companion through her darkest years. She wept for her mother, who never got to see what her daughter had achieved. And she wept for herself, the woman who was no longer the failure in the cafe, but who had finished the greatest literary marathon of the modern age. Before she left the room, she took a black marker and wrote on the back of a marble bust in the hotel: J.K. Rowling finished writing Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in this room on January 11th, 2007. It was a small, private act of rebellion and celebration. The secret was finally on paper. The release of the final book was an event the world had never seen before. Millions of people stood in line at midnight, dressed in robes and hats, clutching their copies as if they were made of gold. People were reading the book in the streets, in taxis, and in parks, desperate to know the end. When the dust settled, the Harry Potter series had sold over 500 million copies. It had been translated into 80 languages. Joanne had become the first person in history to become a billionaire by writing books. But the most beautiful part of Joanne's story is what happened after the fame. She chose to give away so much of her money to charity that she actually lost her billionaire status. She didn't care about the list in Forbes magazine. She cared about the mothers who were still sitting in cold cafes. She cared about the children who were still living in poverty. She used her success to build a world that was kinder and more just. She proved to every person who has ever felt unseen that your current circumstances do not define your future. She showed us that rock bottom is not a place to stay, but a place to build. She taught us that the most powerful magic in the world isn't found in a wand or a spell. It is found in the simple act of not giving up on yourself. Today, J.K. Rowling's legacy is not just in the books on our shelves or the movies on our screens. Her legacy is in the millions of children who learned to love reading because of a boy wizard. Her legacy is in every writer who picks up a pen when they have no money in their pocket. And her legacy is in you. Every time you face a no and decide to keep going, you are using the same magic that Joanne used in that Edinburgh cafe. The train may be delayed, the weather may be cold, and the doors may be closed. But as long as you have your imagination and your courage, your story is never truly over. The boy on the train changed Joanne's life, and by sharing him with us, Joanne changed ours. The journey of the boy wizard has ended, but the fire of inspiration he started will burn forever. What is the dream you are carrying in your heart today? Are you ready to keep writing your own story, even when it's hard? If this 5-part journey has touched your soul, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in magic again. Your support means the world to me. Most importantly, subscribe to this channel and join our community of dreamers and doers. We believe that no matter how dark the night, the dawn is coming. See you in the next legendary story.